now move to Leaders' Questions under Standing Order 38, Deputy MaryLouMcDonald.
Thank you, and I want to extend a Kate Míle Fáilte to Aaron and Sophie Byrne, who are recently married. They're here with their family. So Love's Young Dream here in the Dáil. And Moyle Historical Society from the Royal Fáilte Isteach. Taoiseach, you repeatedly tell us that fixing housing is your #1 priority. So people have waited for the big initiative, for some idea that you might bring forward to turn the tide of this emergency. God knows we've endured your government's directionless approach since you came to office, misleading on housing delivery, beds in sheds, your madcap housing czar idea, really leaving people wondering, would you ever bring forward a substantive proposal? And now, finally, we have it, and you've certainly outdone yourself this time. Because your first major action in housing is to enable big landlords to hike up extortionate rents even further. At a time when government should be acting to cut rents and to ban rent increases, at a time when people across the state fork out on average new rent of €2,000 a month. Here in Dublin, of course, rent can hit €3,000 per month or even higher. But instead, you create a new opportunity for tens of thousands of landlords to jack up their rents. Now, you've made much of the intention to extend the 2% cap to existing tenancies throughout the state. Can I just say to you, Taoiseach, go ahead and do that. Let's do that this week. Because it's clear that that measure is in fact to hide your blushes as you provide landlords with the chance to hike up rents in the here and now, and as you provide yet another sweetheart deal to investment funds to build expensive rental property and charge extortionate rent. That's the real intention of these measures. You say or claim that landlords will only be allowed to reset rent to the market rate if a tenant leaves voluntarily. Well, Taoiseach, tens of thousands of renters leave tenancies voluntarily every single year. So under your proposals, as one renter walks out the door, they will be replaced by another whose rent will have ballooned. Students will be amongst the first hit by your actions. Finding affordable rental accommodation has been a constant struggle for students and their families, but you are now ensuring that this will be even harder, that students and their families will be ripped off even more every year. And worse still, Taoiseach, you explicitly allow all existing landlords to reset rent to full market rate every 6 years. That is essentially the death knell of rent pressure zones. So your plan isn't about protecting or giving stability to renters. It's about allowing corporate landlords, vultures, property funds to hike up rents. Large landlords that have already got sweetheart tax breaks on their rent roll and on their capital gains tax liability. Fianna Fáil on the side of the big boys, who'd have thunk it? Tá plan ann chun cíis roiar ardu níos orja ríis, ní bhaineann sé seo le cíosóirí a cosint, bhaineann sé le brabús na dtíornaí talón corpórdach a bhéadú, comai le brabús na gré cistí agus na cistí muoine. Taoiseach, when you cut through the verbiage, this is just a plan to hike up rents. Some in the here and now, others at a future date. Rents need to be cut, to come down, not to go up. And rent increases should be banned, not facilitated by government. So, Taoiseach, you need to think again, because renters have had enough. They can't pay anymore, and government should not be forcing them into this position.
First of all, could I just extend our deepest sympathies to all affected by the horrific and shocking shooting and killing in Austria. I think our thoughts are with all those who have been killed, their families and their relatives. Could I say at the outset that the reforms announced today of the rental sector will strengthen the rights of new and existing tenants in Irish society, and that is a central part of the reform. And those reforms have been informed by the Housing Agency review. which of course stemmed from the Housing Commission report, which the Deputy Opposite endorsed at the time. All the parties opposite endorsed the Housing Commission report, which pointed to the need for reform of the rent pressure zones. The Deputy Opposite and the Sinn Féin party are very disappointed with the announcement today. They condemned it in advance of seeing the detail. Now they've changed tack hurriedly. Last March, I was told we were going to get rid of RPZs altogether. Every one of you said it, and we are not. And we are not. What we're doing is extending it. It's becoming a national framework now in terms of rent pressure zones. And the evidence has pointed to those areas outside rent pressure zones being under pressure because of that very fact. So we're correcting that in terms of making it a national protective framework. Existing tenants are capped at 2%. You know that, Deputy. You say the opposite here. You just tell untruths with abandon. Yes. With abandon. Existing tenants will be capped at 2%. And that's the reality of it. And for those 4 tenancies above, there's an effective end to no-fault eviction. I mean, that's the bottom line. And yet you come in all sound and fury. But to a certain extent, there's an incredible incoherence in terms of Sinn Féin policy and housing. As Deputy Owner Binya Housing spokesperson, he will meet all the property interests. I have a list again of who we've lately, 30th of April, the Property Industry Ireland, I bet he meets them. Why? For what purpose? Deputies. For what purpose? To introduce incentives for investors to catalyse apartment construction. Deputy MaryLouMcDonald comes in today and says, you're only interested in institutional investors. Your spokesperson has been meeting them on an ongoing basis. Such hypocrisy will not cut it with the people. The bottom line is this. This is a balanced set of proposals. The Housing Agency report was published. It had about 4 options. The government has gone with the option in terms of adapting the existing RPZ because they would expire by the end of the year if nothing was done. And this is, I believe, a strong measure in terms of protection, but also then in terms of new. We do need to incentivise future investment in new apartment buildings and in housing. And I would put it to the Deputy, the state is the lead investor at the moment, with 7 billion plus. The Department of Finance is saying we need about 20 billion to get to 50,000 houses per annum for a sustained period of time. Now, where do people think we're going to get the 20 billion from? Is anybody seriously suggesting?
Deputy O'Brien,
is anybody seriously suggesting that the state will pony up to 20 billion? Which Sinn Féin said we'll triple social housing, we'll triple this without telling us how we're going to get the money. And this is very fundamental. We need public sector investment. We also need private sector investment, and we need to protect tenants. And Minister James Brown has done that today with his package. It's extremely disappointing to Sinn Féin because it's not what they thought it would be. You never anticipated that we'd have the no-fault eviction for 4 tenancies. You never anticipated that we would make it a national protection framework because last March you declared to all and sundry we were getting rid of it completely. That's the language you use. Deputies. It's the language of exaggerate, tell untruth after untruth. Please. And you know what? People might believe us. People might believe us. That's what you're about. But what I'm about solutions. I'm about solutions. Sinn Féin is about exploiting the housing problem and crisis to whatever degree possible for its own political advantage.
Is on her feet. Please, Deputy.
So what you're about, Taoiseach, is screwing renters. You're about doing it very, very brazenly. And then you want to try and distract from that fact. Go ahead and extend the 2% cap across the state. Do it. Do it. Do that. We will support you in doing that, right? I don't think anyone will object to that. But that does not disguise the actual intent and the effect in the here and now and in the long term of what you are about to do, because it is being gutted, the rent pressure zone provisions. So existing tenancies, let me read to you your own words. All landlords will have the right to reset rent where the rent is below market value at the end of each 6-year tenancy. There you have it. There you go. That's it. They're your words. I've raised with you the issue of turnover tenancies, you know, where people voluntarily exit the tenancy. That happens tens of thousands of times every year. And I have told you, amongst the first really hit hard with this will be students.
Thank
and
you,
I would
Deputy.
like you to respond. Yes,
Thank
they
you,
will.
Deputy. Your
Yes,
time
they
is up.
will.
Taoiseach
This is
to
the
respond.
import of your
Time is up,
proposal.
Deputy MacDonald.
And the disappointing thing, Taoiseach, is
Deputy, your
everybody
time is
knows
up.
that rents are extortionate at this point.
Taoiseach,
The job
please.
of responsible government is to ensure a cut in rents,
Please,
to
Taoiseach,
ban
respond.
rent increases, and
Deputy
instead,
MacDonald,
Fianna
your
Fáil
time
and
is
Fine
up.
Gael want to facilitate the
Taoiseach, your
jacking up
time
of...
now, please.
This government wants to increase the supply of houses to get to 50,000 per annum. But the proposals of Sinn Féin,
You
be it
either
a
want to
rent
hear
ban,
the answer
be
or
it whatever
you
the
don't.
Deputy has said, would actually reduce supply. You have no ideas. You have no solutions. That's your problem. And the people saw that last time out. You don't have it because you don't accept there's any role for the market at all. And that is a fundamental problem in terms of your
Please,
presentation
deputies.
on this issue. And I stress again, existing tenants will be capped at 2%. New tenants in new supply,
Deputies,
new tenants in new supply will be capped at the CPI level. So the caps are retained. The
Deputies.
framework. Look, I didn't interrupt
No,
again,
I
but this is
absolutely
standard practice
accept
for Sinn
that.
Féin.
I accept
because Sinn
that.
Féin is interested in just throwing untruth after untruth across the House, and they're not prepared to listen to the truth. You're not the leader yet, Deputy. You're not the leader.
Your time is... Taoiseach, thank you.
Look, the Deputy,
Thank you,
the Chair,
Taoiseach.
the Deputy's opposite. They're into performance, they're not into substance.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Ivana Bacik. Deputy Ivana Bacik. Please, Deputy Doherty. Deputy Ivana Bacik, your time started.
I just want to join with others in expressing sympathies to all those affected by the school shooting in Austria. We're just hearing news of that. Taoiseach, back in February, someone in your government was briefing the media about a proposed end to rent pressure zones. For years now, you've refused to contemplate designating the whole country as a rent pressure zone, and yesterday morning, the future of the entire RPZ scheme was in question. And we were hearing this on the airwaves from your own representatives. But by bedtime last night, in a screeching U-turn, we learned that the whole country is now to become subject to rent pressure laws. So perhaps we should start calling you the grand old Duke of Cork, because you led your men up to the top of the hill before marching them all the way back down again. And it's just a mercy, I suppose, that they weren't sent over the top. A mercy for renters, because really, Taoiseach, it seems to be that you're making it up as you go along. As Conor Sheehan, our housing spokesperson, says, there's more holes in this announced policy today than there were on the Titanic. It's a panicked pronouncement. And it may be that you're doing this because you're responding to the latest findings that house building has contracted during May. We're seeing a fall in activity in Irish construction firms. But none of this is the fault of renters. Rather, we could see an ominous slowdown in construction, largely due to the sort of kite flying we've heard from many in Fianna Fáil, suggesting that developers might get tax breaks if they wait a few months until the next budget. So in fact, what we're seeing is policies from government that appear to be ad hoc, that are sowing fear among renters and sowing uncertainty among investors. Taoiseach, meanwhile, each month, more and more people, more and more children are finding themselves homeless. And we know that eviction from the private sector is a key driver of increased homelessness. And we're all hearing today from renters in desperate fear. I heard this morning from one constituent in her 40s saying she's absolutely devastated at the announcement in RPZ changes. She fears her landlord will terminate her lease. She believes she'll have to leave Ireland because she cannot afford €2,500 to €3,000 per month in rent. And her story is not unique. Her fear is reflected across the country because renters in Ireland know that renting is like a lottery, or more accurately, a casino. The wins are rare and somebody else is always making a quick buck. Now, your party and Fine Gael have been in government together for the best part of 10 years, and things have only got worse in that time for renters and for those seeking to buy an affordable home. I think we'll all agree supply is the biggest problem. Yet instead of taking urgent steps to address this, what we're seeing is this sort of extremely vague and opaque policy, which you say will strengthen renters' rights, but which we're hearing from renters themselves and from those who work day to day on the front line assisting and supporting renters, we hear it will have the opposite effect. And meanwhile, as I've said, uncertainty among investors as to precisely how they are to be incentivised to build the homes that we know are so desperately needed. So Taoiseach, we all know that when rents go up, people can no longer afford to pay them and will therefore face homelessness, will face being evicted. So what safeguards are you going to put in place for those likely to be constructively evicted by landlords who are anxious to hike rents under these new proposals?
To respond.
There's two things, Deputy. First of all, Fianna Fáil have been in government for 5 years, okay, not 10, and it's a fact. That's a fact, in government for 5 years. Secondly, you said people were briefing at the end of February, the end of the RP. They were not briefing. What happened was I went public and said there would be reform and there would have to be change. And we'd have to. I actually made a general statement saying we would have to attract private sector investment in. All of you deliberately distorted that and declared that it was the end of the RPZs, when it was never, ever contemplated to end RPZs. The legislation was expiring at the end of this year. You endorsed the Housing Commission report. All of you did. Read it. It said that the Dáil was too reactive, too much short-term decisions taken in the last Dáil. Through the chair now, please. I haven't interrupted you, Deputy O'Brien. You don't own the place. Just have the decency to allow an exchange between me and the Labour Party leader. You haven't assumed the status of leader yet, and may not either for a long time to come. But Deputy Bacik, if I could take the point.
Deputy O'Brien, you cannot continually interrupt, please. I'd ask you to. Thank you.
The fundamental point is, as a result of these packages, we've now given a national framework of protection. Existing tenants will keep the RPZ at 2%. New tenancies, if we get new bills, which is what we want to do, will be capped at CPI. The protections in terms of no-fault evictions from 4 tenancies on are very significant. And there are other protections, and there will be other safeguards. So what is now emerging is probably the strongest set of rent protection measures we've ever had in the history of the state. That is the reality. If you forget all the noise, the sound and the fury, and go through it detail by detail, this is a well-balanced package. We're talking about all existing tenants will stay at 2% as per the existing RPZ, which you wanted retained. It's been retained for existing tenants. In terms of new tenants, and we do need supply, Deputy. Surely you agree that we need more supply. We need more apartment building. And what's needed for that? Certainty. Policy certainty for renters, policy certainty for investors. And that's what this package gives. Because we do need private sector investment in apartment building. And the final point I would make is, this is but one of a suite of measures that have been taken and are being taken to significantly change the dial in respect of both private sector investment and public sector investment, which we've already announced since the beginning of the year, up to €800 million worth. And up to today, 83% of all tenancies are within RPZs. We're now extending that to 100%. And these are good measures, Deputy. Surely you should acknowledge that. I don't think you expected it. That's the problem. Because you declared it was going to be the end of the RPZs. And that's your problem with the opposition. You've been cut out.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Bacik, excuse me. Deputy Bacik, before you start. Deputy Bacik, just before you start. We have a full gallery, public gallery. I'm asking all deputies in the House to be respectful. This is leaders' questions. It means each party gets to ask a question. If you're happy heckling during the answer, I'm going to let you off. I don't see the benefit. We have a 3.5-hour debate on housing later this afternoon. If you could be respectful, all respectful of one another, and we get through the work. We have an agenda till midnight. Everybody stick to their time, please. Now, Deputy.
Gurmahagat. And I think, Taoiseach, we can all agree certainty is needed, clarity is needed, consistency is needed for those renting, for those looking to buy a home, for those looking to build and develop homes. But that's precisely what's lacking in your own government policy. You're accusing the opposition of being caught out. You've caught out your own backbenchers. You're flip-flopped on policy on rent pressure zones and protections for renters. None of us can see how you can say that there's going to be increased protections for renters. You're extending the RPZs, sure. But if you're hollowing out what is meant by an RPZ, if you're reducing protections for those within RPZs, then that doesn't have the desired effect. And again, renters are fearful. They're desperately fearful. And Taoiseach, one thing that hasn't been mentioned, the idea of tying rent caps to inflation, which you're proposing for new builds, this lacks foresight. There's huge uncertainty here again, because particularly in the face of Trump's threatened tariffs, and the impact that they are likely to have on inflation. And so what we're going to see, I think, is that this will gut the net benefit of your stated objective, which is to increase supply.
Thank you,
and
Deputy.
we all want to see supply increase.
Thank you, Deputy.
But we don't believe
Taoiseach
this is an effective way to do it.
If you read the Housing Agency report, and I'd invite you to do it and to read it in its entirety, if you look at the ESRI analysis of the rental market, in reviewing both the domestic and international literature and so on, there has been a negative impact, particularly in 2021, on measures we took on supply into the residential market. That's in the report. So the balance, there has to be a balance. I take it you want investment in the private sector. So if you don't tie it or give people certainty about the CPI, why would anybody invest in the future if they could endure a loss? It's not, people aren't going to do that. Like, we need a bit of practical reality here. That's the point. So the balance has to be got right. And I think we've got the balance right whilst protecting tenants to an even greater degree, than had been the case, on top of protections which we brought in for the last number of years as well. I mean, there's been, over the last number of years, there have been stronger and stronger protections brought in for tenants and for renters. And that will continue under this measure. They're even stronger again.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Cian O'Callaghan of the Social Democrats.
I also want to extend our sympathy to all those affected by the school shooting in Austria. Taoiseach, you were right about one thing. I didn't expect these proposals. That's because at no stage over the last number of months, or indeed weeks, or even today until the press release was issued earlier, was there any mention from government in all of your spin that what you're actually introducing here, and you haven't even acknowledged it yourself in your comments, you seem to be ashamed of it, and you rightly should be ashamed of it, is that every 6 years, rent regulation as we know it is effectively gone, and landlords can up the rents fully every 6 years. You can talk about your 2% or your inflation and all the rest, but really if people are going to face astronomical rent increases they cannot afford every 6 years, you're going to drive more people into homelessness, and in a situation in a country where rents are already incredibly high and amongst the highest in Europe, you're going to make things even worse, Taoiseach. So will you actually admit that in your press release issued today, the third last bullet point, that what you're doing is allowing rent increases, full in rent increases, up to any level, up to market levels, across the board, any landlord, any tenancy affecting any renter? That's what these proposals are about, Taoiseach. A government policy to increase rents. They're not my words, Taoiseach. They are the words of homeless charity Focus Ireland in describing your proposals. And what you've done, Taoiseach, in terms of us having incredibly high rents here already, is you're now bringing forward a proposal to make that situation even worse. You are throwing renters under the bus. Incredibly, you're planning even more favourable treatment for vulture funds than already exists. They currently pay almost no tax. They charge some of the highest rents in the country. And now when it comes to rent regulation, you're rolling over them yet again. You're allowing investment funds who control the entire rental stock in an area to jack up rents to what they determine is a market rent every 6 years. And these funds, Taoiseach, have so much control, they will often be able to decide and determine what a market rent is in an area. So, Taoiseach, who is in charge here? Is it the government or is it the vulture funds? Taoiseach, homelessness is already at record levels. There's 15,580 people living in homeless emergency accommodation. That includes 4,775 children growing up without a home. And these proposals, with these incredible rent increases, are going to drive more families and more children into homelessness, Taoiseach. How could you be contemplating doing that when homelessness is already at record levels? I want to ask you, Taoiseach, in terms of this work that you've done, these proposals you've put forward, have you actually assessed the impact of these proposals? If you have assessed it, will you publish that assessment? Do you know, as a result of these changes, how much rent is going to be increased? And do you know, as a result of these changes, how many more people are going to be driven into homelessness?
Thank you, Deputy.
Deputy, existing tenancies are capped and will remain capped at 2%. Yes, that's what it says. But hold on. So you will have a chance later. What's the fundamental objective here? Twofold. Policy certainty for renters and protection for renters, and increased supply. And one of the great challenges, Deputy Callan, and I respect your commitment and interest in this, but the supply side you are very weak on, and your party has been very weak on. Because all of your proposals over the last 3 years, cumulatively, would reduce supply and would do nothing to increase supply. We have a fundamental challenge as a society. We need to get to 50,000 new houses per annum every year. We're at about 30-odd thousand. We might be higher than that this year. We don't know. But it's 30,000 plus. Back in 2019, it was 20,000. The state investment has largely brought it up to about 30,000 houses plus. We need significant private sector. The overall investment required is about 20 billion to get to 50,000. That will not be provided by the state alone. Institutional funds and pension funds have a role. Your party may say it doesn't. I don't see how you get to 50,000 new units. You might call them vulture because that's part of the problem in the political narrative. That's what's actually undermined the entire debate on housing. There are pension funds out there that invest. The state invests. We're going to invest more. We're investing at an unprecedented level from a state point of view. But there's also, if you look at the table, the majority of landlords or people who rent out are actually not institutional investors. And in fact, over the last 3 or 4 years, there's been precious little institutional investments of a scale that would be required. The vast majority are 4, 3, 2 and 1 tenancies in terms of the rental market. We need a more dynamic, sustainable rental market for the future. And this package does facilitate that and gives certainty to enable more investment in addition to keeping all those in the market at the moment. Because I don't believe you can replace all of it by 100% state either constructed housing, state rented housing, or whatever. And we do a lot on rents through to HAP and through local authority rents and so on like that. So the involvement of the state is enormous. It has to be balanced and supplemented with significant private sector investment. And this is just one measure. This measure on its own isn't going to do it. It will need to be accompanied with other measures. Last week, we took a decision to roll over, legislatively that will happen, planning permissions that might have been delayed by JPRs, judicial reviews, in order to keep supply going. It has to be about supply. And I do honestly say this to you, and from the opposition in general, its proposals on the supply side have been extraordinarily weak and not forthcoming in terms of how you get to 30,000 a year to 50,000 a year.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy O'Callaghan.
Taoiseach, time and again we've put forward proposals to increase supply and increase financing, most recently in terms of leveraging some of the savings that are on deposit in Ireland, incentivising how they could be invested into housing. The key thing here is that pension funds in other countries actually invest in housing that is affordable. You're creating a system where rents just go up and beyond people's reach. That's the difference. But Taoiseach, this is the wording in your government press release released just over an hour ago, and it says, all landlords will have the right to reset rent where the rent is below market at the end of each 6-year tenancy. Are you saying that the press release is wrong? You haven't commented on the ability of all landlords to reset the rent every 6 years. You keep on brushing around about 2% and inflation. Answer that. Is your press release wrong, Taoiseach? Or why are you not commenting on it? Are you ashamed of what's in the press release? Why do you keep talking about everything else but that this is a measure to effectively abolish rent regulation as we know it and to allow astronomical rent increases that people simply will not be able to afford and that will push more and more people into homelessness?
Thank you, Deputy.
First of all, the one proposal you've come forward with is the savings incentive scheme. I will answer.
Please, if you could
But that scheme you came forward with would take years to accumulate the funding for investment. It would produce not one single house over the next 3 to 4 years. And in relation, Finland, you're correct. Sorry,
it's
I'm
not
answering
your
the question,
Deputy, please. Yeah. Deputies, I told you, it's not your question, it's Deputy O'Callaghan's. Well, Deputy Taoiseach, continue, please.
The 3 points you made, right? I'm going to deal with this right. That was one. Second one, in terms of institution. Finland is a good example where institutional investment had a huge impact in terms of house construction and apartment construction. And thirdly, Germany is a bad example of where the rent pressure controls that you're advocating created a huge decline. We're below the market rate. There's many tenancies at the moment well below the market rate. If some tenant exits, if a tenant exits...
Thank you, Taoiseach. Your time is up. Deputy Paul...
There's been repeated interruption.
There has been.
If there hadn't been interruption, I could have all 4 points.
Excuse me. Deputy Paul Murphy. Deputy Paul Murphy. Deputies, if you can't allow anyone to ask or answer a question, this is where we end up. Deputy Paul Murphy.
Thanks, Cian. This is an incredible brazen display by the Taoiseach. It really is. 3 times now, you've been asked effectively the same question. I'm going to ask it again. It's not clear to me if you don't understand your own government's proposal, you are misleading the House about your own government's proposal, or the press statement issued by Minister Brown's department is inaccurate. You need to clarify for us which it is. Because I quote you not just once or twice, but about 5 or 6 times now, you have said existing tenants will be capped at 2%, new tenancies will be capped at CPI, and this is the strongest set of rent protection measures we've ever had. The truth is, if the press statement is accurate, is you are gutting, you are absolutely gutting the rent pressure zones. So you get your nice headlines saying that the rent pressure zones to be extended to the whole country and significant expansion of tenants' rights, when in reality, you are getting rid of the rent pressure zones. I will read it for the 3rd time today, very slowly for you. All landlords will have the right to reset rent where the rent is below market at the end of each 6-year tenancy. Not just new landlords, not just big landlords, not just small landlords, every single landlord. Which means existing tenants, new tenants, yes please, if the Minister could inform the Taoiseach what's going on here, what's in the policy, that'd be very, very helpful. But it's what it says in the press statement. It is what it says in the press statement, all landlords. So what you're saying to existing, new tenants, all of them, is they get the limited protection of the 2%, or CPI if it's new, for 6 years. After 6 years, at 6 years, it's a free-for-all. They get to reset to market rate. So you have 2% increase, 2% increase, 2% increase, 2%, 2%, and then 40%, 30%. An unimaginable level that is simply not affordable. That's what the press statement, that is. I'll read it again. Okay, it does say that. I mean, as part of this master of the spin, it also says tenancies of unlimited duration to be enhanced by introduction of rolling 6-year tenancies. As some enhancement, Taoiseach, you're getting rid of tenancies of unlimited duration and going back to the old system of rolling 6-year tenancies. It's Orwellian, really, what you are presenting. The logic of this, the government, is you want rents to rise. It's not enough that they have doubled over the past year. It's not enough that over the last 10 years. It's not enough that a third of tenants are now paying more than 50% of their net income on rent. It's not enough that more and more landlords are actually coming into the market. No, you want rents to go up even faster. That is why tenants, renters, people who are trying to buy a house, people who are locked out, who are going to be locked out even further, are going to be on the streets next Tuesday, 6 p.m. in front of the door as part of a major raise the roof mobilisation to stop this government and its landlord agenda.
But you announced that march before the proposal was even announced. So that sums it up. That sums it up. You just change the narrative every time it suits you. And the bottom line is this. No, I'd say to you, if you're an existing tenant, there will be no change. Simple as that. There will be no change if you're an existing
Please
tenant.
allow the answer.
Yeah, there's no reset at 6 years for an existing
Please,
tenant.
you asked
However,
for clarity. Deputies, please. Deputy Murphy.
in terms of new tenancies, new bills and new apartments that will come on stream, hopefully, because this is about supply, Deputy. With the greatest respect in the world, if we'd adopted half of what you proposed, we'd have no supply at all in the market. That's the fundamental difference. We do need more apartments, we do need more houses, and we need more rent into the rental market. And yes, in many instances right now, when the RPZs originally came in, many people are still well below market rates. And if a tenant exits voluntarily and leaves, the tenancy can then reset to market rate. That's okay. In my view, that's reasonable. If many people who went, when RPZs came in first, many people didn't increase their rents. Quite a number didn't. And it's, I think, in order to keep the momentum within the market and to keep people in the market, I think that's a balanced response to the current situation. And we do want to bring more investment in to build. So you have capped at 2%. The second cap is CPI, right? So basically, there's a cap of whatever the inflation rate is. The inflation rate is forecast to be 2% on average for the next number of years. It's also the focus of the ECB to keep inflation at 2%. Now, if you don't tie it to CPI, say we freeze it as you are saying, Well, why would anyone invest in any new apartment block? Why would anyone build a new house or a new or a new apartment for rent if effectively you would begin to lose money within a couple of years? So no one's going to make an investment decision on that basis. And that is what you're proposing, that we have a rent freeze for 3 years or longer. So no one's going to invest in a market where essentially you invest knowing you're going to be losing money fairly quickly. So the package is about getting a balance to incentivize investment into the rental market whilst protecting existing tenants who will not see an increase in their rent. No matter how much you shout that, they will not have an increase in their rent above the 2%, which is part of the RPZ and has been for quite a number of years. And that is the position. And I think these are balanced measures. No doubt you thought you'd be fighting a different set of proposals. You announced ages ago we were getting rid of the RPZ. We're not getting rid of the RPZ. We're extending it, making it national and giving stronger protections than tenants had before this package was announced and would be
Thank you,
legislated for.
Deputy Murphy.
It's not me suggesting it. It's not. It's your own press statement saying that the right to reset. But it's not just in a written press statement. It's also Minister Brown told the media. I'll quote from him at the press conference earlier. He says, what happens is at the end of the 6 years is that the rate setting piece so that effectively the rent could be put back to the market in line with what the press statement says. So which is it? So new tenancies are going to be every 6 years. Every 6 years. Well, it's not what you said, and it's not what your press.
Taoiseach, please, you will have an opportunity.
No, deliberately. You're the one.
Deputy
You have the. You have Taoiseach. You have the press statement.
Deputy
but
Murphy's
let's deal. You defend the idea that if tenants leave due to it's not a no-fault eviction. They leave mid 6 years, that it could be reset. Yeah, you're saying you are in favour of that. You're saying that's not a mistake. That tenants, anytime a tenant leaves, the rent can be reset. That is a recipe for like rocketing rents. How high do you want rents to go? It is also, let me finish this point, it is also a recipe for constructive evictions. Where the landlord says, I'm not going to fix your heating, I'm not going to fix your toilet, I'm going to force you out
Deputy
so
Murphy,
that
your
I
time
can
is
reset
up.
the
Taoiseach
rent.
to respond.
Voting on this.
Deputy, resume your seat. The Taoiseach, I'm not going to allow you to continue to speak. Your time is up. Taoiseach, respond.
It's interesting in the exchange you acknowledge it's new tenancies. Okay? I've been saying since I came in that existing tenants would not have their rents increased beyond 2% as per the RPZ. Now, hold on, please, look, you're all interrupting because you don't like the facts here. The bottom line, in respect of new tenancies, yes. In respect of tenancies where the tenant has left, so the tenant doesn't get exorbitant increases, basically the balance here is we need more investment into the market, Deputy. I know you don't really believe in that. I think you believe a state in its entirety, and that's the fundamental difference. I would argue if we were to take your policies, we'd have no new supply at all. That is a fundamental difference. I acknowledge that. You don't believe in a market-based economy. That is your position. I happen to believe in a balanced economic framework whereby you do have public sector investment, and we have unprecedented levels of state investment, but you will need private sector investment to get the level of investment we require.
Thank you,
because I don't think sustainably the state can spend 20 billion per annum on housing
your time is up,
alone.
Taoiseach.
That will not suffice. I don't think the people want that
In
sort of
accordance
approach
with Standing Order 35, I now call on the Chief Whip, Mary Butler, to move that the arrangements for the week's business be agreed to.
I move Cian.
Are the said arrangements and proposed arrangements for the week's business agreed?
Agreed.
To? Not agreed. In order of whips, please. Deputy McLaughlin.
Taoiseach, you'll know that the international activists on board the Madeleine, the aid ship, have been kidnapped in international waters, taken to Israel. Some have been deported, others will be deported. But at least they took action. They took action. All we hear from you is words. Now, when we talk about words, you said in the Dáil that the central bank are not facilitating the sale of Israeli bonds. Will you correct the record, and will you support the motion coming through the Dáil tomorrow and reverse your position and at last take action, definable action in support of the Palestinian people?
Taoiseach, in your own programme for government, there's a commitment to publish a national policy on adult safeguarding in the health and social care sector, and you state that a considerable amount of work has been done. Given the revelations in the RTE Primetime Investigates for our older and vulnerable residents in nursing homes, can you please have a debate this Thursday on this issue, where you can outline where you are with this, when we're going to see legislation, and can we please all acknowledge that the outsourcing of our residential care for older vulnerable people to international conglomerates has been an absolute failure.
Thank you, Deputy.
Last week's Primetime Investigates again highlighted the failure by successive governments to enact safeguarding legislation for vulnerable adults. We were promised this 20 years ago after the Leeds Cross scandal, in 2014 after Orsa Tracta, and more recently after the Grace report, the Brandon report and the Emily report. We urgently need to implement the recommendations of the Law Reform Commission report into safeguarding. The safeguarding bill that's on the current legislation programme is too narrow in scope.
Thank you, Deputy Paul Murphy. 30 seconds this time.
Thanks. RTE Investigates made for really harrowing watching, to see people treated without any shred of human dignity, treated like just burdens. We need to debate this in the Dáil this week. We need to implement adult safeguarding legislation. We need to implement mandatory reporting. But we also need to deal with the fact that we're the most privatised system in all of the European Union in terms of nursing home care. That didn't happen by accident. It happened through tax incentives from Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and is the root cause of the problem.
Thank you. About 2 weeks ago, Taoiseach, the government announced plans to buy City West Hotel. That's a huge concern to the area, to the constituents in surrounding City West Hotel. I think a debate has to happen here in the House. I mean, the purchase of any hotel, a debate should come before the House regardless of what needs, and I think this is a huge issue going forward, and it's a huge concern to the politicians, or to the public out there. Sorry.
Thank you. Deputy Patrick Tobin, Understanding Order 35.
Yeah, good morning. Understanding Order 33.4 ain't proposes that we amend the Order of Business on page 1 of the Order of Business to remove lines 9, 10 and 11 and replace with statements on nursing homes to conclude after an hour and 50 minutes. It's absolutely scandalous what has happened in this country in terms of older people, the neglect and the abuse that they have.
Thank you, Deputy. And now, are the proposed arrangements, Chief Whip.
Cian Corla. So just in relation to the many statements that were raised in relation to the Primetime Investigates last week, I think everybody was absolutely horrified and scandalised at what we saw. I'm in talks with the Minister at the moment to secure time to have this debated, and I will revert back to the various whips. In relation to the City West Hotel, we have discussed that at the Business Committee last week, the week before last, and time will be found in relation to that as well. In relation to Aontú's proposal, it's not accepted.
Thank you, Deputy. Sorry, Deputy. Deputy. Excuse me, Deputy McLaughlin. The question is, are the proposed arrangements agreed to? I can't compel an answer, Deputy. The question now is, are the proposed arrangements agreed to? Not agreed. So I put the question. Deputies who are in favour say tá. Deputies who are against say nil. Vote all.